very gently for a nice pastel tone. We'll go to the canvas, and just in the sky area I'm going to capture a little of this, and I'm just going to stir or swirling the brush in a circular motion and put a little of that coloring on the canvas. This will help create more interest and color variety in our sky. We'll go back down to the palette for a moment, and we'll add to this same mixture a little more alizarin, strengthening that color, and then start introducing a little Prussian blue. The two colors together will turn kind of a lavender tone. Mix the paint thoroughly into the brush. Don't leave little streaks that'll come back and bother you as you try to get other tones in. Okay, let's go to the canvas and just once again stirring around, going kind of skimming around the areas that we had before. I'm working mainly on the top half of the canvas in the sky area and kind of eliminating most of the white that is left at this stage and leaving patches of pink. Not over brushing and not over mixing. Let's go back down one more time to the palette and add a little extra Prussian to the brush, bringing the blue sky back up just slightly. Notice how I can continue to change the mixes in my brush and the different colors, but I allow one color to soften into the next. Let's go back up to the canvas, and we're going to swirl some of this coloring. Notice how each time one color melts very gently because of the basic white into the last color, leaving little patches of the pinks peeking through. Let's come to the left side. And sometimes I tap the color on. That gives me a little splotchy effect. And then I tickle it very gently with the brush. Down at the horizon, I want it kind of light. So I'm going about mid-canvas and swirling in and around. You could develop a very beautiful sky by building in this sense, but you want to be sure that you don't put too much excessive paint on the canvas. While I have this particular soft blue coloring in, I'm going to go down to the bottom edge and just brush horizontally to tone that and get rid of some of the white that's down there. That way I will have a little foundation that can peek through for shadow foam. I think I'd like to make that just a little bit more on the purple side, so I'm going to go back and add a little alizarin to the mix. Right now at this stage the colors aren't as important as the placement. As long as I have nice soft colors and I'm building slowly with very little bits of paint and changing the tones and the colors, we're going to come back up and I'm going to darken that just a little bit. You can see how it's a little richer since I added a little more pigment of blue and alizarin. Just toning and brushing into the white, it applies very easily. Now remember, we have more paint to put on this canvas. I normally don't do a design or a drawing on the canvas, but maybe it would help you after I establish the horizon to see how that wave is going to go. I want to get the horizon line established, so we're going to come back down with the same brush to the palette, and I'm going to mix a watercolor in. Now, I use a lot of times Prussian blue with a little sap green. That will mix together to make a similar color to a phthalo green, which is another color I like to use a lot. Need a little more blue in it, but just so you have kind of an ocean green coloring. Sometimes I'll use the phthalo in this step. But this time I'm going to make a similar coloring of phthalo by using my Prussian and my sap. I want to establish where the horizon line will be. Don't come exactly halfway up the canvas. Try to make it a little lower. Just skim that brush. See how easily that paint slides on the canvas. I'm leaving a little bit of a light area here that later will end up being my... I need to stand back. I'm going downhill a little bit, so I'm going to just use that chisel edge, slide right across. Notice the streaky lines effect. I want a little of this coloring down in the bottom, and I overlap, going over the first layering of color and getting an intermixing of color. So I get variety in the water, rather than just blocking it in with one tone. Okay, notice the little soft lavender in the center, almost creates a highlight. We need to establish a dark ridge for the water, and I think I'm going to switch brushes just for a moment and use the fan brush. The fan brush will allow me to go into the same mixing spot. This is dry and clean. I'm going to add a little more Prussian to the brush. This time I will add a little phthalo and even a touch of alizarin to make it turn almost a black. It's going to be a very dark, rich ocean color. I want to get it almost a black green. Now that I have the brush properly loaded, I'll go up to the canvas and I want to establish that wave line. Now you could use the corner of your brush and you could just kind of skim the edge of the canvas with an uneven line, and we're going to have a little peak right here. That's where we're going to have the spillover, and it's going to kind of spill that way. And the eye of the wave is going to be located just off right center canvas. Under here, I want this dark. This is going to be the dark mass, so I'm following underneath that line, and then I'm going to start pulling it over kind of underneath the eye of the wave, just kind of sliding in that direction. And look how easily those paints flow and blend. And I just catch it and ease my pressure, a little dark down underneath the body of the wave, and I just gently let the paints move. Now you could place it more carefully, but I think you'll find that this is a fun way to do it. This is going to be flat water down in front of this wave, so I'm kind of skimming the brush horizontally as I create movements in the water. This peak is a little high. I'll end up removing that peak and putting it into backwater, and when I paint my foam on that, you'll see that I'll drop that down. I want the highest point to be at the crest of the wave, just to the right of the eye. I'm going to go ahead and bring this coloring in behind it somewhat, leaving a little gap and streaking this foreground color into the background somewhat. So this is one way of doing it. There's a lot of different approaches that you can make, but in this time frame, I'm just trying to concern myself with the basic structure of a wave. It gives you an idea how you can build your paint slowly on your canvas. So this is what I'm hoping that you'll keep in mind. You have to know where you want your wave and your basic structure, but building paints in little bits at a time helps you develop and can keep in control of that structure. I've reloaded the brush one more time with a little more dark, and now I've turned it narrow, and I'm just putting little rocking strokes or cradle strokes through here that's going to give a little choppiness to the water. See how I just kind of skim the canvas? Gives a little movement. Sometimes I push a little harder on the brush and get a little extra dark that I can develop. Maybe a few streaks of that coloring in the distance. That creates the light off in the distance. Really didn't do too much with my sky. I think I'm going to go back with a clean 1-inch brush for a minute. Well, that one wasn't clean. It had a little paint in it, but I'm going to wipe it out. And I'm going to gently soften back in the distance, that horizon. I'm going to let that color be a little softer. Sometimes when I'm in a classroom session and when we work on a larger canvas, I'll actually put a piece of masking tape on the canvas to keep my line straight, because you do want a straight horizon. Mine's a little crooked, I hope you forgive me, but I'm trying to show you basically how you can soften, blend, and I do have an established horizon. Before I go back into the water, I'd like to go ahead and put a little distant island off on the far right of the wave that'll help create a contrast area for the burst of the foam of that wave. I'm going to use the number 16 flat brush and go down to the palette and rub into that kind of lavender mix that we had earlier. That was my Prussian and pink that I started out with. I'm kind of avoiding the ocean watercolor. In fact, if you have to mix up more, you just take a little titanium, speck of blue, and then a speck of alizarin, and you mix up that kind of purple color. Whoops, got a little too much paint there. Okay. I'm going to have to wipe my brush a little bit on a paper towel. I have a little too much paint. I'm going to create that island, and notice how this is a nice chisel edge brush, and I'm going to just block in a basic form or shape, not going quite. You'd either want to go beyond center point or stop before you get to the center of the canvas, and block in a ridge or cliff line. Let it go right down into the water. It's okay to let these two colors kind of melt together. Pick up a little of one color into the other. It will add more interest and beauty to it. Wipe the brush occasionally if you find your paint's traveling more than you want it to travel. There becomes a flow of color if you allow the colors to intermix. If you put the paint on heavily and then just block it in with one hard, distinctive color, it looks like an add-on. There's no flow to the painting, and I like the colors to soften and melt together gently. This is what adds that little bit of a soft touch that I try to achieve in my paintings, that little blend of colors, and I do that with the control of the paint. Let's go back down to the palette for a minute. Add a little touch of Van Dyke and gray that just slightly. Same basic mixed grade with a little brown. And let's establish that a little stronger. Maybe the top ridge. See how I've strengthened the value of the color mix? And then I just kind of tap it in. And I can get all sorts of neat effects. Sometimes I smudge in a little spot, and I design or structure that island in this manner. I'm going to pick up just a little more and find that point. It's a little weak. It almost looks kind of like a glary sunny day. And that's a nice effect to try to achieve. Don't worry too much of where it goes into the water, because I'm going to use this as an area for splash, and I want that wave splash. So actually, maybe we'll come down to the wave, and where the eye of the wave is going to be, I'm going to need some shadow foam that's going to come up and then I won't have to worry about all that conflictive distance. And then we're going to have some rocks over here. So let's go ahead and give a little bit of a leading guideline for you for that so you can see where I'm headed. I think I'm going to clean my fan brush and my odorless thinner, since I am using oils, dry it thoroughly on a paper towel. Then you can go ahead and you can take the titanium white. This is my thicker white. This is not the soft white that I started the painting with. I'm going to come over into a new blending spot, smooth that brush, and mix up some more of the Prussian and a touch of alizarin. I'm looking for another lavender color similar to what's in the sky. Got a little heavy on my blue, so I need a little white to soften it. And I need a creamy bodied paint now. I don't want my soft blend paint. We'll leave that a little on the blue side. We'll come in, and I want to think about where my foam is going to be. And I know I'm going to have a spillover right there. I'm using the handle just kind of to give you a little bit of guide. But right in this area, I'm going to put that blue coloring in, and that's going to be the shadow foam to give my foam depth. There's going to be a burst of foam that comes up over the rock. And now this value, being different, and the coloring is just a little different, you'll see how that's going to loosen up, and I'll be able to build those rocks in. I'm going to wipe the brush, go back to the palette, and pick up just a little more of that, and come over here, and right where I want to find a little of that shadow foam on this one, maybe even a little down in here. All I'm doing right now is getting a kind of a placement of my colors. Even in the distance, I can have a little bit, softening the edges. In the eye of the wave, it's nice to have a little burst, a translucency that looks so attractive in oil paintings. Sometimes it's very difficult to achieve, but what you want to do is try to remember to keep little bits of paint. You can always you can even let a painting dry and go back and reapply, but then you don't have the benefit of a wet-on-wet painting, which I utilize to my best benefit, partially because I have to paint wet on wet in this short a time frame, but I could go back and add in. But I like the way one color will softly melt into the other, as I'm totally using all of the wet on wet techniques in these sessions. Okay, I'm using a little bit of titanium white with a tiny speck of sap green. It's going to give me a nice minty green. If you have a clean sap green to begin with, it'll give you a beautiful light green. Sometimes I'll add just the tiniest speck of yellow, but you don't want to get it too vibrant. Let's come up to the canvas now, and in that eye of the wave, I'm just going to kind of tap that color on, placing it where I want the eye of the wave to be. And then I'm going to lightly pull it down and gently, kind of almost pat blend it to create that aura up in that light area. Sometimes I even run a little across the top rim here because that's going to have a little light up on the back edge. And so that gives me kind of an idea of where I'm headed. You can even put a little bit of that color down in the water here because the light sometimes reflects back up through the water. And just a little touch here and there will keep interplay of coloring. I look at my painting and I study it and I say, well, I don't have enough contrast or value change right in here. So I'm going to go back down, and since I'm going into dark, I'll just use the same coloring that was left in the brush. Go back to my dark blue, little alizarin. That makes a rich purple, but then I bring little phthalos in to give it a little greenish or sap color, and I want to strengthen this area underneath. So I'm going to look how much darker and richer that is. Tap that underneath the shadow foam. See how that pops that blue out a little better? Now we're going to have rocks here, so we don't want to spend a lot of time there. Gently, gently brush blend. Even wipe the brush or clean the brush. Sometimes I even use my finger to soften that line in there. And then I will pull directional lines. Well, I do need to clean that brush. So I'm going to take a moment, clean that fan brush, nice and dry, and I'm going to be able to soften a little more without that paint traveling as much. If I don't take the time to do that, the eye of the wave will be lost and that paint will come and overpower it. So I want to be able to keep that control in there. There we go. So I've placed values and colors. Now I can straighten this out just a little bit underneath. And that's a pretty color. I'm going to go and add a little more over here. Just bring some more of that phthalo green color, that dark color mix in my water. It's color variety that begins to bring that painting alive. Okay, we need to concern ourselves with the light on the distance. I have a number of ways that I could do that. I think I prefer the palette knife the best to create those straighter lines, because if you don't have a steady hand, you'll have a tendency to get waves too far in the distance. I'm going to use my edge of my palette knife and pick up some titanium white and spread it out flat. And then I'm going to pull down and across it with a nice even load across the blade. and come up to the canvas and create a little interest off in the distance. Just touching that at first will create these little sparkles. Seems to break and give these nice, interesting little lines. If I slide it slightly, I can get a ridge developed. If I slide a little harder, I can even develop a stronger ridge, and it begins to imply waves. It's allowing the paint to sneak out of the back end of the knife. If I'm going from left to right, I watch the point of where I'm coming from, not where I'm going. Keep the blade horizontal. I can either go this direction and watch the paint come out of this end, or I can go the other direction and watch the paint follow and trail behind, and it gives those little breaks. Sometimes you can use the point of the knife and just pull down a little bit on that paint and stretch it, and it gives a little wave indication. I have to be careful I don't get too close into the eye of this wave. Maybe I'll use my finger and just kind of eliminate a little of that paint. Okay, I'm not even going to use a brush and stretch that paint, which I've done on a number of the shows. I'm going to just leave that. That turned out pretty well, and you don't have to brush it. It depends on how much paint you apply. I'm going to add just a little bit more and come over to the island and maybe have a few little indications in the water back here. Just the closer together I get these lines, the more perspective and depth I can get in there. But I want you to remember we're going to have a spillover and a splash here that we want to try to capture. Okay, maybe a little of this coloring in the foreground, and then catch it with the point and direct it and give it a little interest. I love to sometimes shift my paint around with my finger. Okay, if you find that the knife is very difficult for you to use, you could do this with a brush, but you're going to have to watch the consistency of the paint and how it will apply. A thick, sticky paint won't want to come off, and you'll have to push harder, and that kind of sometimes bogs down in all the paint. Okay, I think what I've achieved right now is a fairly good block-in. If we take an overall look at the painting, let's just look and study it for a moment. Once I bring the splash up, it's going to have a little more interest, and of course the spillover. The eye will be okay. We want to concentrate on surface patterns and highlights. Before you start putting your lights on, you want to be sure you have an adequate amount of darks or value range. This is kind of nice in the back. You can take a dry brush and occasionally just tap a little hard line that you're not comfortable with. We have plenty of sky, but part of the focal point is a lovely seagull up there, and we want to have plenty of time to get to that. So let's proceed with the wave, and I'm going to use a clean, dry fan brush. Now there's two processes that I find that work very well for the foam, and the ones that I use mostly in my classes. There's a lot of others that you can use, but let's do these to begin with. I'm going to start with a dry fan brush and my creamy titanium white, my thicker white. Now the reason I want the thicker in the first stage, it won't come off as easily. Thin white and my basic white, which is a paint, will come off a little more easily. But we'll start with this. I'm going to go up to the canvas, and I'm going to kind of put a cresting on this wave. And if you just go in and lightly press, you'll find that it gives a little bit of a fuzzy droplet effect, and sometimes just tap lightly and let it come on down. If I wipe the brush and then start letting a little basic white, my softer white, come in, it will come off more easily. I'm going to walk right across the top of the eye a little bit and then just kind of press with more the corner of the brush and push a little of this white in there. And I get these splotchy effects, which give me variation. It mixes with the existing paint that's there. Just kind of stabbing at the canvas. Don't brush it or stroke it. Just kind of pat it. Create some little value changes. Once you've picked up blue, you can see the blue on the brush on the corner. I start tapping gently and letting it fade down into the shadows and mix with the existing blue. That gives me depth to the foam. You don't paint foam with just a white paint. It just doesn't work as well. Okay, we've got a little bit of that action and foam into there. I'm going to wipe the brush now and load strictly my basic white. This is soft, thick, rich-bodied basic that's different. It's not a watery kind. It's not just a primer. And I'm going to use it as a paint to create the spillover. Let's come up across the level portion. There's going to be a little bit of an angle up, and touch and gently just kind of create an arch. I'm just touching at the top of this high point right here and kind of stroking very gently down and over to create into the wave to create that spillover. You don't want to brush it too many times. I may be playing a little more than I should, but that creates that nice indication of the direction of the water. Maybe a little more white over here. That's softer white, so it comes off easier. It gives me a little more cresting. A little bit of a foam splash here. Down in this area, I have many options. I can use a fan brush. I can use a liner brush. I think we'll try to do both. Let's try a few fan brush movements and create some little dancing lines on the surface of the water that are almost horizontal. Look how simply this, I know this looks awfully easy, but there's a lot to understanding your oil paints and what they can do for you. So I'm just using a fan brush right now. I even use the palette knife sometimes. We want to get those rocks in so you'll have the object that those waves are breaking over. Let's take a, whoops, I just picked up a dirty paper towel. Let's take a palette knife for just a moment, and we're going to block out the rocks. Now, I'm using the knife to really remove paint at this stage. And I'm going to kind of cut into the paint, and this will allow me to get a darker value in there. Otherwise, they're going to mix a little too much. So we're going to have to use that. Sometimes you can use a paper towel and just wipe it. This removes the basic white and some of the existing paint and allows you the opportunity to put more dark color. I'm going to start with a little Van Dyke brown. I have a little touch of burnt umber on the point of it, and I'm just going to block in a mass form. I'm not concerned. I leave little pockets and holes. Leave some of the shadow foam that's going to wash around the rocks. Why paint it back over it? If you leave it there and you've established it, what's very nice about this effect is it'll leave like water and washing foam down around the rocks. I'm going to put a little bit more Van Dyke and add a little of that purple to it, just so I have a balance. I don't want that rock to be hard, so I'm going to allow some of the softer colors from the water to be reflecting on those rocks. Now I'm going to design them. I'm going to use the number 16 flat bristle brush, wiped out, and come up and soften some of the edges. Now if you'll come in real close, you'll see how that paint moves very easily. Sometimes I lose a corner, let it disappear into the foam, and just kind of let it diminish, and just leave potholes and spots where the foam's breaking over it. It's easier to do it this way than to paint in a large, hard rock and then try to paint foam and get dirty foam back on. All right, I'm going to just kind of let it come down, reflect in the water a little bit, maybe add a little paint to the brush, make a little larger, darker rock here in the front. Okay. As we block that in, it needs to have a little water around it. Let's go back to the fan brush and use a little more of our white, but this time let's put a little lavender in it. Let's change the color of that basic white, and we're going to put a little shadow foam on the back edge. This is not as bright as the white out here, and pull it away from the rocks gently. Sometimes I let it wash down over the rocks as if the water's dripping down. And you can design your rocks by creating the spill over the tops of them. And just don't get it too tight, too tightly designed. A little more blue into that. Let's get a little more shadow foam over here on the edge. See, I can go back and I can change my values and all. So I have a nice blurred splash of water, bring it down over the top edges, give it a flat top on the surface. We want to get to those waves, but before I do, I want to use a little bit of liner brush work. So I'm going to get my liner and come to some basic white, and my soft white is going to make it very easy to do a few foam patterns. Let's come into this area and just put little rocking smiles and create interlocked, I just tell my students, with little grins, they're really not smiles, and create surface patterns. Being basic, it has a lot of body to it. You can see how that brings that alive and creates that movement on the flat surface of the water. I'm concentrating in the center, creating that type of action where it's most important, where that light seems to be filtering through. You can rim the edge of the wave a little bit. If you get too much, just tap it lightly. You can bring with a little shadow. I have to go down to the palette for a moment, pick up a little more of that blue in it because it's in the shadows. It's more my sky color, and bring a few of those wave lines up and design a pattern for the structure of that wave. See how I kind of pull it up? Okay. I want to get those birds in because they're a very important part. A few more lines in like this. And I'm going to double load and try to get a nice seagull in for you. By double loading a liner, you must have your paint very fluid, kind of a gray. I add a little brown to it. Load it very heavily with thin paint, kind of rolling it. Come and drag half the brush through your white, then come up to the canvas and place one very nicely. You can almost point to your wave sometimes and make an arch with an arch. Then we'll bring one over here kind of against the other. I'm going to put a little dark marking on their wingtip. And in 26 minutes, we were able to achieve a fair amount of detail in this painting, but I want you to realize, take your time, go back over areas. restructure dark if you need it, and then work on your highlights. I hope you've enjoyed this and will have a lot of fun painting seascapes yourself. Thank you again for joining me.
To get your Paint with Pittard 2 step-by-step instructional guide by Lynne Pittard, send $14.95, check or money order to Paint with Pittard 2, P.O. Box 1713, Department G, Delray Beach, Florida, 33483, or call 1-800-942-4000. Please have your MasterCard, Visa, or American Express card handy. That's $14.95, check or money order to Paint with Pittard 2, P.O. Box 1713, Department G, Delray Beach, Florida, 33483. Price includes postage and handling. This 72-page full-color guide contains the 13 paintings shown in this series.
Art is fun for you.
Stay with us now for some artistry in the kitchen. An informal dinner on Julia Child & Company, followed by the Victory Garden at 4:30, and the Frugal Gourmet at 5. Chocolate today. And don't forget tonight's Garrison Keillor Christmas special from Copenhagen on WGBH Radio. Starts at 8 o'clock, and it's at 89.7 FM.
Just try it, you'll like it, 'cause art is fun for you.
Paint with Pittard 2 with Lynne Pittard was made possible by a grant from Line Nickel Artists Brushes and Graphics Plus of Florida, Incorporated, publishers of educational and instructional materials.
Local broadcast of Painting with Pittard is made possible by our members in partnership with the Prescott House Nursing Home, located in North Andover, Massachusetts, and owned and operated by the Solomon family. And with the Magic Touch Art Studio in Maynard, Massachusetts, owned and operated by Chuck O'Neill. Tonight at 8, beauty, grace, amazing agility, and a wonderful story, as Robin Cousins, Rosalind Sumners, and other top skaters star in The Sleeping Beauty. Then at 9:30, Luciano Pavarotti and some newly discovered singers regale us with scenes from La Boheme. It's a Pavarotti celebration. And at 10:30, there's comedy, Kaufman and Hart's classic Once in a Lifetime. It's all tonight on Channel 2. Stay tuned.
If you've made your pledge to Channel 2 recently, well, thank you.